to have we're really lucky today to have Franco Naccarato with us. He's the executive director of Meat and Poultry Ontario, and through that work, also the founder of the Center for Meat Innovation and Technology. Additionally, he is a board member of the Greenbelt Foundation and previously worked operationally in some of their grant-making activities as well. So a wide range of experiences and a real focus on innovation at the ecosystem level and around access and public purchasing. So lots to hear from, and I'm going to give it to Franco to pick it up from there.
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate being here and working with you throughout the years and the Wallace Center and all the local food work from food hubs to value chains. It's been it's great to be here to talk with the value chain coordinating group. One of my favorite topics, and so I'm hoping I could share some of the things I've learned over the years. You've heard my recent experience, but to really understand value chain coordinating, I think one of the reasons why I love this topic so much is because it involves connecting all the dots. And I've been fortunate in my career to be a part of a lot of those dots. So at a university, I worked for a couple of dot-coms outside of food, but after that, the dot-com crash, I got into food because that's kind of where I spent my university years cooking in a cafeteria. It was easy, and I wanted to learn how to make pizza, so I started working in a pizzeria. Within 2 weeks, ran that pizzeria for 2 years. So really got to understand what it meant to be a restaurateur, how to source food, how to buy food. And then from there, got a job working for a distributor. I think everyone here would probably be familiar with Cisco, probably the largest distributor in North America, if not the world. But got some really good training and understanding how food moves. Through my experience at Cisco, I was part of a group that looked at identifying issues and solving the problems. We reshaped our produce program based on some challenges we were having. But during that, I actually got to do a deep dive, not just on how we bought food, but actually how the food got from California to our doors, and all the different modes of transportation and in between. There's a lot of things hidden people don't realize. The more you look into the food system, the more layers there are, and the more you understand. It's not so black and white in terms of getting it from your door to the consumer's plate. There's a lot of steps in between. The bigger it gets. So I've seen it from the biggest eyesight, and then I got to work with our Ministry of Agriculture and got to see it from a farming perspective, and then I was connected to people who are doing direct farm to plate. And worked with some amazing chefs that were, buying from farms within 10 kilometers of their establishments. It was really exciting to see the difference in the food system and the different approaches and the value-based relationships that were being created. So and through that experience, I think the Greenbelt Fund experience is mostly connected to what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to give you my perspective on value chain coordinating. And really that started, I think there's two key components of value chain coordinating than any other type of coordinating to me. And the first one I learned from actually the Value Chain Center of Excellence. The founders, they did a presentation a number of years ago, back when I was with the government, on value chain coordinating. And the one thing I got about value chain coordinating, you're not trying to push food through the system, but you're pulling food through the system. And I think that's one thing that when we're talking about value chain coordinating is starting with the end in mind and getting that end person to say, I want this. What it does is it allows people to easily sort out if they want to be a part of that food system or not. And our government in 2010 made a commitment to buy more local foods for public institutions. And I was fortunate to be part of that time frame in creating a grant program to help with that. And at the time, I would say there was no public institutions buying very much, other than maybe one or two that were kind of leaders. City of Toronto had a great group that were pushing small institutions, daycares to get it at least. And they've done a really good job there. But broadly, there was nobody doing local foods. And so I joined the Greenbelt at that time to kind of be the forerunners at how do we get more local foods into the institutions. And the second thing I realized, and that was, so the first thing was understanding value chain is about pull, not push. And the second thing that's the foundation to value chain coordinating is you have to realize you're a change agent. And I think understanding that from a psychological point is important. If you want to do some training, research, knowledge about change, I think the best thing to look at is organizational behavior, social psychology. Really understanding how change happens is key. And managing change as leaders is very difficult and it takes a lot of time. So I think the first tool you need is patience. And the second one that goes with that is persistence. And I go back to one of the probably the most difficult project I ran, but also one of the most rewarding. I was about a year and a half into the project, and we were trying to get more local foods into institutions, but we tried to marry a local food system with a big distributor, and there was a lot of failures. And like I said, a year and a half in, we still hadn't shipped a product. And my boss wanted to pull the plug on me and he called me into his office. And so he told me, I'm pulling the plug on the project. We haven't shipped anything. I said, well, wait a minute. I also haven't cost you anything yet. The funding has all come from other funders. The funders are happy with the progress we've made. And let me tell you about all the things we've learned. And so through that, I spent an hour and a half talking about all the different parts of the value chain, all the different parts of what we were doing to get to where we were. So we talked about getting listings, what that took. We were creating 133 listings of local food products that would be delivered just in time to a public institution. The public institution was on board, and we got them to sign on and to commit to being the first purchasers. We got a food hub to partner with the distributor, so they would bring the local food. So we did all the groundwork over that year and a half. But it took time, and it took a lot of meetings and a lot of everyone had different expectations. So getting all those expectations aligned, it took a lot of time. And like I said, a year and a half in, we hadn't shipped a product, but then we did. And then we learned a lot more. And that project was never realized the full potential of what it could have been, but we learned at every step, and at every step we continued to grow our understanding of the food system. And he did allow me to finish the project. We spent another year and a half on the project, and I was delighted with the results that we got out of it. We were successful. Some of the relationships carried on, some of them didn't, but throughout all of them, everybody that was in it was happy. So I was really good. So, but persistence and patience are very important. So some things take time, and you got to stay on top of things, and you got to be willing to put up with a lot of barriers in value chain coordinating. A lot of people want to say no. A lot of people want to get in the way, and most of the time it's passive aggressive behaviors that are getting. No one will come out and say no to you. They'll say yes, but then they'll put up many roadblocks on getting in your way. So that's where you need that. The other tool I think is important to understand as change agents is to use iteration. And I learned this through my days of building websites. And I think it's the best term that came out that I've learned in that is change in baby steps is far more successful than trying to change the whole system. The less you change, the better it is. In fact, if you could change nothing, change nothing. Change one thing at a time. And I heard data being talked about, and that piqued my curiosity, because I think one of the best things we did as a funder was the first round of funds, we paid people to collect data, to change their IT systems, to make it easier to identify local foods, because the current systems didn't allow for that. So I think that's a big thing, is to understand the current system and change very little. Well, the instant you're able to measure something, you can effectively change it. If you're not measuring it, you can't. So that's one small change that you could start with that will change how people behave. So if you're looking to change something in the food system, measure it first. And I think that really leads to my first tip as a value chain coordinating is understand where you've got to go. And it was our first board meeting at the Greenbelt. We'd launched a local food program, and our mission by the funding was to get more local food into public institutions. So we launched. I started in October. The second week I there, the program was launched, and our first intake was December. So trial by fire job, loved it. Very exciting times. So we created the guidelines, wrote them, did outreach, got our first round of applicants in the door, and agreed to by the end of the year, and they were launched by January. And at our first board meeting, I've never been in front of a board before, presented these projects. And the board asked a question. They said, how much local food is this going to increase? And how much are we giving them? And that became the benchmark of the program. That became the nucleus of everything we asked from there on. And I think that was the reason why that program was so successful. We asked the question, how much more local food are you going to produce, and what's it going to cost to do there? And what was that ratio? And that was kind of the foundation of that funding program and what we wanted to achieve. So that set our goal up. And then from there, we looked at all the rest of that meeting was, okay, what are the other things we want to measure? What are the other things we want to filter and look at? So we looked at many different factors in that program, sustainability. And when we talked about sustainability, we took it from a 2-point perspective. The environment. So is this sustainable? Is this good for the environment? But also, is it good for the business? So the business continuity piece. So sustainability, there was a 2-part aspect of that. And we looked at that as one of the filters after the ROI. We also looked at innovation. And we looked at innovation from a number of different standpoints. Is this something new to the sector? Is this being adopted? It's already adopted elsewhere, but it's new to the region. Or is it new to that segment of public institutions? So, for instance, maybe long-term care was, child care was already doing something, but nobody had done it in long-term care. That would be considered partially innovative because nobody else in that sector was doing it. And we had a case where we had done no work with colleges and it was about year 2 or 3 in. So we finally got a project with colleges, and that ranked high on innovation because nobody in the college sector had really stuck their neck out and tried anything. And the next kind of level after that we looked at is leadership. And we looked at the leadership within the organization. So how influential is this person able to change their own organization and to have a lasting effect? And how likely is that organization in the whole scheme of the food system going to affect others to participate? So, having organizations like Cisco and Gordon Food Services participate, even if it's the smallest thing, gets the attention of the entire distribution businesses. And so that's a big plus there. So we looked at many different ways of looking at leadership. And then after those things, those are kind of the first ways we assess things. And then we looked at filters. Ontario is a big place, so we looked at geographic representation. Let's make sure we have examples of rural projects versus urban projects, northern projects versus because northern have distinct differences. Eastern Ontario had distinct differences, so we want to make sure we had good representation from each of those different regions. We looked at types of organizations. So we want to make sure that all the different sectors of the broader public sector were represented, all the different types of distribution. So broadline distributors like Cisco, food hubs, direct distributors, farm to table type places. We wanted a variety of distribution models. And then a variety of suppliers, right? The small farmer with 2 acres, making sure we have projects with them, as well as the large institutional suppliers to the Ciscos of the world, making sure we had big suppliers in the mix as well. And we were really looking for balance, right? The idea is let's not put all our money in one area. Let's get as much diversity as we can. And then finally, the target audience. Oh, we talked about that in terms of institutions. And the last thing we looked at was risk and reward. So how likely are they to succeed, and how likely are they to continue the work afterwards? And this was really brought to us by one of our advisors on the team who was a banker. And he said early on in one of the first projects, he goes, "This is a very risky project." And we said, "Okay, what does that mean?" He says, "Well, their line of work is here and they're trying to do something over here. That's very high risk, not a good idea." The only time we looked at that and said, okay, maybe it is a good idea, is when the reward outweighed the risk. So we don't mind taking some risk. And I think risk is good to take in grant making. And somebody's got to take the risk, right? That's why grants should be there. There should be some experimental pieces to allow for people to step out of the norm and to try things beyond. And we just limited that scope through phasing of grants. So if there was something really out there and somebody was going to try something different, we don't mind taking the risk, but we limited that risk by introducing it in steps. So, okay, why don't we start with a planning grant for you? So instead of the 200,000, we're going to give you 20,000. Show me you have a good plan. Show me you're in a good place. And then in 6 months from now, if you have the right plan and we agree with it, we've reduced the risk, and now you could go through the rest of the project. And one of the best lessons learned from that was we did that with one grantee. It was a great idea. It was very risky. And actually, the first thing I heard back from the grantee was, "I'm really grateful you asked me to do this planning. We've actually identified this is not the right market for us." And so we saved $200,000 investment because they would have spent 3 months, 6 months, and they would have abandoned the project otherwise. They discovered that it wasn't right, and that they did find a niche that was good for them, and they did pursue that, but they didn't need the 200,000 to do that. They had the existing supports to do it. So really exciting to see what you could do with those planning grants, and I think there's a great advantage to doing those types of things. One of the greatest successes we had out of this program is the return on investment. I think at the end of the 8 years, we had a 26-to-1 return on the investment. And that really stemmed from the breadth of projects and establishing ourselves as people who could fund pretty much anything from, Eric mentioned earlier, we granted everything from micro grants from $5,000 to $1,000, all the way up to, I think we had over $1 million to some grants over periods of time. Gordon Food Services was one of our largest recipients, but also one of the largest contributors to the growth. I think when they started with us, they were doing about $6 to $7 million in local foods. And by the end of it, I think they had reached $72 million in local food sales. So we were really excited to watch these institutions, organizations grow throughout the time. So the second tip so first tip we talked about was being change leaders and taking things in baby steps. I think the second thing to look at is know that you're not alone as a value chain coordinator, and don't try to do everything yourself. There are many champions that could do things for you and to amplify what you do. I saw, and this idea came from a number of different places, but the first place I recall was a talk by Joel Salatin, and I applied. He took it from a micro scale, and I apply it to the food. I like doing that, taking things that work on a small scale and seeing if they scale up. That's a good model. And so Joel Salatin was talking about his farm. If those who don't know who Joel is, he's a livestock ranch producer. Love him or hate him, he's a very successful farmer. He grows as naturally as possible. I think they call it regenerative agriculture. Everyone has a different term. But he talked about how he grew his farm from rock and sand to one of the most vibrant farms in the world. And one of the lessons he was talking to farmers one day, and he was talking about lessons. And one of the things he talked about was creating fiefdoms. And he said to the group, "I bet you there's a job on the farm that you hate doing. And I bet you there's somebody in your organization that loves doing that job. Empower them and give them the tools they need to be successful and let them own that space. And so I would say the same to you as value chain coordinators is find your fiefdoms that you don't like working on, that you aren't great at, and find champions and stars that accelerate in that area and let them shine and let them be your teachers and guides. So in my days at the Greenbelt, we kind of did a classification of supporters of local food from the yes sirs to the stars, and I'll share some stories with you about what that is and how you can help support them. So we early days in my Greenbelt were talking about local food, and there wasn't anybody when we talked about growing local food that said no, that's a bad idea. But what I learned from talking to people and finding out why, well, you all say you want local food, public institutions. So many of you aren't even doing anything. Why is that? And so as I would go out, I'd talk to them and learn more about what you're doing. I learned the reasons why. And I think the first one was the sayers, I call them. Yes, we love local food, but I'm not going to do anything outside of the ordinary, outside of my job duties to make that happen. Right? Like they'll wave the flag, but there ain't anything they're going to do to change, right? They're the buyer, they're the chef, anybody in the organization. Could be the CEO say, yes, we'll wave the flag. Everybody likes waving the flag, but I'm not going to change how I buy things. I'm not going to change what I do unless somebody tells me to do it. And then, in that case, then I'll do it because then I'll have permission and I'll be okay. So that was kind of the first layer. And it was easy to identify them because they always said the same thing about why they couldn't buy local food. It was too expensive, wasn't available seasonally, and I can't remember what the other one was, but yeah, it was repetitive, right? Everyone, no matter what, that made me know, okay, that's a sayer. We need to get them to start to the next level. I call them the testers. They're the people who actually try doing something. Okay, I like this. Maybe I'll buy the local tomato instead of the imported tomato. They won't do anything complicated, but if there's a supplier that they have that already has local, they'll switch from one item to another. They'll try it out. And that's really the first stage of getting people to be change, to influence change. And they're an exciting group to work with because if they're successful, you reassure what they're doing, they'll continue to grow. And then they'll get to the next level, which are the doers. And those are the people that are going to start taking risks. And they're the ones that are going to break the rules and push the envelope. And they're going to ask for permission to do different things. And they're going to push their managers and challenge their managers to look at different ways of doing things. And that really gets them on the path of the champions. And then the champions, the difference between champions and doers is champions are teaching others how to do it within their own organization. They're pushing the envelope even further. They're setting the rules. They're the ones that are, even if they don't have the power to do so, providing the groundwork for those in the organizations to help change the rules in their organizations, to let them do more, to buy more local. And then the last group are the stars or the disruptors, whatever you want to call them. And that's the group that go beyond their own organization. And this is the group, the value chain coordinators, you got to find and amplify is who are the ones that are doing it and let them be your stars. Because from the outside, you always have very limited influence over changing people. People from the inside always have greater influence. So find those stars and disruptors and let them take over, let them be your voices, and just help amplify and give them a chance, a place for them to talk through coordinating, through messaging, through case studies, whatever it takes to get them out there. And they're the people that are going to go on long after there's funding, long after there's support. So they're going to keep doing this. So really, those are the most valuable people to spend your time with. The third tip I want to give, and this is probably the one that most people miss, is, and in particular in the tech sector, understand the systems you're trying to change. So, and instead of trying to change everything at once, try to change as few things as possible. So you're only able to do that when you really understand the food system you're trying to change. And I'll give you an example. When I joined the Greenbelt, they got the initial funding from the government to get local food investments because they were one of the first to invest money into getting more local foods into public institutions. So before I got there, they had an initiative called Greenbelt Fresh. And the whole idea was they wanted to connect public institutions with farmers, and they wanted to get those institutions to buy direct from farmers so they could cut out the middleman. And they thought this was great. So they're going to schools and hospitals and long-term care facilities. And look, we have this great website where you could buy from farmers markets. And they had some good successes, but they missed something. They didn't take perspective on how those institutions were already buying their products. And so there was a few that chefs and managers they met that were really into it, and they were successful at it. But that success was always limited and capped. They couldn't break that barrier until I got on board and said, okay, but you got to look at the whole food system and try to make it accessible any way that they want to buy local foods. And so understanding the way those chefs bought food, the way they had relationships, and finding ways of getting it through those channels really opened up the door to our success long term. More recently, I would say the something I learned in my current job. At Meat and Poultry Ontario, we did a study back in 2019 on how do we get automation into the meat sector. And I laughed when I was challenged with this because I knew the answer. And everybody's attracted to automation, robotics, Internet of Things. They're all sexy terms. But what they don't realize is our food system is still very pen and paper, especially on the small scales. So you're talking about trying to automate a system that isn't even ready for digitization. And so I said, we're going to do a project. So I was asked to do a project to talk about automation. I said, I'm going to do a project on identifying where we are today and then talk about how we could get there. And so they agreed to that. And then we did a deep dive. We looked at 5 or 6 organizations, and we looked at everything they did from A to Z. And the first thing we found was they were all using technologies from 1980 to 2008. So how do you take a business that's using antiquated technologies and move them into robotics? You can't. You're setting them up for failure. And that happens in local food. That happens in everything every day. People try to go from 0 to 100 and they fail because they're trying to do too much at once. So what we developed was a roadmap for change, and we identified where we are today and what's the first thing we need to do to get to robotics. And then we have a map of progress over years. And part of that led to the establishment of the Center for Meat Innovation and Technology, saying we need to demonstrate technologies. People need to see how they can be used on a small scale, not just in the big ones. Like we have some large scale production using robotic arms. That's great. If you could afford $1 million robotic arm and you have the space to do so, doesn't work in a small plant as easily. So how do we find those scale appropriate technologies? And that's what we're trying to do at the Center for Meat Innovation and Technology.
Hey, Franco.
Yeah.
Just going to pause you here as we've reached the point of the Center for Innovation and Technology, which seems like a great sort of, these ideas add up, and then you take another leap to say, okay, we've got what we're doing, and then we add a whole center that's taking the ideas and putting them directly into the innovation mode, just to protect space for some questions, whether from folks on the floor or some of the stuff that we've got to highlight some of the things you said. One of the things a couple people noted in the chat was that push versus pull that really resonated with people. So I don't know if you have any other insights on that value chain coordination side around moving to the pull stance and things that work well for that, or barriers you might encounter if you try to move towards the pull orientation.
Yeah, I could spend an hour just on this. Um, so the pull is really about starting with the person who's going to make the decision, right? And so in the broader public sector, we really spent a lot of time convincing public institutions this is the right thing and motivating public institutions, you need to do this. And they created the pull, right, for everything else that we did, right? So by getting Compass, Aramark, Sodexo engaged, by getting the municipalities engaged, City of Thunder Bay, to put in their procurement policy, they will buy 25% local. And I'm not sure that was the amount they chose, but they chose, we're going to choose this amount and we're going to buy local. They then put those in their procurement contracts. We had a buying group. They bought on behalf of 13 long-term care facilities. This became a pillar in their organization. And every procurement, that was a question they asked, is this local? And their goal was to increase it by 25%. Well, they did that without increasing cost. And that was one of the most fulfilling, groundbreaking projects we had, was demonstrating in the most difficult area of local food, being, in my opinion, institutional long-term care facilities, with a budget of, in Canada, I think it was $8.66, something like that, for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and two snacks. They were able to increase their local food purchases
Wow.
just by asking the question. And so that's the pull, right? You get the person with decision making to make a stance, I want this. And then a value chains coordinator job is like, okay, they want this. How do we put all the pieces to facilitate it and to make it going? So really, for me, a value chain coordinator is your hunter to convince people at the end, the retail guys, the food service guys, the people who are making the biggest decision making. How do you buy more local?
Thank you. Another one. So, you talked about the working with the range of scales from the smaller scale folks to some of the bigger players that could actually move the needle in some cases on the local procurement, like 6 million to 72 million, pretty big growth with Gordon's. Are there guardrails or things in relation to power dynamics or wealth imbalance that you have to put in place or structurally do to try to, sometimes the big folks don't always play so nice in the sandbox. Are there things that you need to do to protect or reinforce the interests of the smaller folks when you're working with a range of scales?
Yeah, I think the best lesson learned was that project. I said I failed a lot. One of the things we learned was a lot of the challenges was the values dynamics. And if I were to go back, I think I'd spend some more time at the beginning, even more time aligning values. And I think the one thing that a lot of people forget is even the biggest of companies were small ones. And I was at a conference in Eastern Ontario, and there's a great success story in the community, a dairy farm who by no means was a corporate monster. They were a very large company, and they were talking about their successes. And I was next to a farmer, and they said, "Oh, but they don't count. They're big. They're not local." But they're the embodiment of success, of what every farmer would strive to be. Their values were aligned. Like, they have a very strong values organization. And I think that sometimes we get caught in, because it's big, it's bad. I think it's how they behave is most important. So, and every institution, no matter how big they are, there's good people, actors within their organizations, and there's ones that are interested in other outcomes. And I think the to get success is to get people aligned on values, and people want to be aligned on values, and just showing them how they can do it is key. I think you can end up with a lot of challenges getting small guys working with big guys. We have in Canada a big challenge with our grocery stores. We've been calling for a grocery code of conduct. So we have, I believe it's 4 to 6 purchasers who control 80 to 90% of the retail products purchased. And so even for big companies like Kellogg's, they are a small buyer or a small player in terms of power dynamics. So imagine that, right? Everyone knows how big Kellogg's is. Well, they're minor in terms of their buying power and selling power to these big retailers. So there are dynamics that are in play that can limit your abilities, but I think every institution has an opportunity to develop relationships that can be collaborative and you can have success at. Does
Thank
that
you.
answer your question, Eric?
It does. And I now want to go to Shauna's question from the chat. And Shauna, let me know if I don't get it right or if you want to say it yourself. You want to say it yourself, or shall I just give it as a spin? Here's what Shauna said. Did you do any work on ownership structures and making sure that the benefits stayed rooted with local growers and local processors?
Ownership structures?
Yeah,
No.
of the different players in the system, folks that you were working with, thinking about how to ensure that benefits stayed with local businesses, whether it was the growers or the processors.
No, we had an interesting thing happen here. Actually, we had a mega quarry mask themselves as farmers, tried to take over a whole bunch of farms. In fact, they were looking at something three-quarters the size of Toronto in terms of a mega quarry. Anyways, I'm not going to. We'll get sidetracked on that, but they had bought up a whole bunch of farmland and tried to use it to become a big mega quarry. We weren't directly involved in that, but there was a lot of lobbying that came about. The only work we've done on ownership structures is really helping food hubs scale up and in the formation of regional strategies for hubs. Late days in my greenbelt, and then there was a project we did in Northern Ontario. It was meant to be a workshop. And the workshop idea was how do we collaborate in distribution in the North? And I had a planning meeting just to kind of scope out the project. And I was told, stop, this is too important. We need to make this a project. So it actually became its own project. Ended up working with, I believe, 32 different organizations. We held 3 to 4 meetings. We had Indigenous leaders there. We had fly-in communities, people that were flying food, bringing food in by boat, train, any way you can imagine. And basically, they set up a charter to talk about how can we share in the distribution and connection of local foods. And it ended up, one of the greatest successes was the city of Thunder Bay made direct relationships with Indigenous communities and agreed to buy anything that they could procure from them. And they actually put that on their menu. So they had a remote community, Sioux Lookout, was getting them food from their community that was then being supplied to the long-term care and hospitals in their region.
Thank you. I'm going to stop you there and go to Pete in case Pete has any closing comments, just so we keep on time for folks. Pete?
No, I don't have any additional comments there. We do wrap up here at 3:15 Central time. So I want to just appreciate you, Franco, for just like walking us through such a wealth of knowledge. And hopefully you're seeing some of these comments in the chat that there's like a lot of appreciation and kind of dot connection that you helped with folks there. Maybe if you'd be willing to drop your contact info in the chat, Franco, so that people can follow up with you. I know there's a lot of good stuff there. But yeah, just appreciation there, and encourage folks to reach out if you have any additional questions. The last thing I'll say before I pass it back over for any final words, Franco, and from you and from Eric, is just to encourage folks to sign up for the October 15th VCC CoP call. We're getting that one shaped up, and I think it's going to be a really good one. So I'll drop the link there and then pass it back to you two for any final words.
Special guests coming up to be continued. Stay tuned for October. Some folks that we know and love in this community. So it should be super fun.